Thanks a lot, Mrs. Chairwoman. Good afternoon, everyone. I will quickly first thank warmly the organizers, European Values, I like a lot this title, for inviting me. And I'll try not to be too long, I tend to be too long, and I will touch upon three aspects. First, but in a snapshot, a very quick one, because I think it's important, it's related to the question of radicalization, how I do see the threat in Europe. The second point is, of course, the core of the subject, radicalization, de-radicalisation. What is it that the European Union does in this field? And finally, I will end up with 4 challenges. The first, the threat, much more complex than it was after 9/11, where we had one organization, Al-Qaeda, structured like a multinational company. Much more diversified as well. We have 3 main sources of threat. We have, difficult to put a figure, but a quite impressive number of EU resident and EU citizens who have no link with a terrorist organization. They don't travel abroad, but they just get radicalized in Europe. They are inspired by Al-Qaeda or Daesh or other groups through internet, of course, prison major incubator of radicalization, radical imams, Salafist movement, and networks. And if you look at a country I know best, the first wave of Belgians who went to Syria and Iraq, they were mainly recruited by a Salafist organization called Sharia for Belgium in the street. So that's the explanation. Internet plays a role for the second wave. They want, what the organization wants is just to inspire, like the title of the magazine of AQAP, people in Europe who have grievances to mount small-scale attack, not 9/11 type attack, where they can, in their direct vicinity, and if needed, they indicate the target. Charlie Hebdo was among the top 10 on the list of Inspire as a target, and the way to achieve it. And you can find the recipe on how to build a bomb in your mom's kitchen. And that's indeed a strategy which seems to have been elaborated by Abu Musad al-Suri in a book of 1,600 pages that I have not read, I must confess, which call for decentralized jihad, for solo jihad, and in fact depart completely from Al-Qaeda, which was the idea to target the far enemy with big, large-scale attack. So that's the first one. The second one, and it's important because in the debate about migration, we have to realize that we have people born in Europe, convert, they're not coming from outside. The second aspect is, of course, this huge number of foreign terrorist fighters. Probably around 5,000 from Europe, if not more. They come from, it's 25, I think, all in all, in Syria and Iraq, coming from 100 countries. They are indeed military trained, ideologically brainwashed. They develop a network of friends and peers all over the world, which is quite worrying. And some may be direct to mount attack in Europe. We don't know. Some of recent plots in Europe may have been directed. We don't know yet. And the third one, and I stop here on the threat, and that's something that I fear myself, is the turf competition between Al-Qaeda and Daesh. And the risk to see Daesh, which is losing. Daesh is on the winning side. They expand to the Sinai, to Libya. You have more and more organizations, former Al-Qaeda franchises pledging allegiance to Daesh, Boko Haram, some in Somalia, some in Afghanistan, even Wilaya Khorasan, that Al-Qaeda may want to mount a big attack to show that they are still relevant. So I stop with the threat. So radicalization. We call it the way we want. The Americans call that more CVE, counter-violent extremism, and I think the OSCE call it violent extremism and radicalization leading to violence. I don't have time to open that box. When should we start being concerned? Is it radicalization leading to violence or a bit before that? And if you follow the discussion in the UK, it seems that the Prime Minister now wants to go a bit before than just the step before violence. But that would lead us too far away. But before turning to what the European Union does, I would like to just state how much this is a difficult subject, and I will pinpoint 4 difficulties. The first one, this is indeed a very complex process, very difficult process to understand, very difficult process to handle. Look at online radicalization. Until 2 years ago, people tend to say that it's impossible to get radicalized online only. You always need an interaction with a physical person. And it was a long process, very long process. Now we have seen teenagers in France radicalized on internet in 2 weeks' time, leaving for Syria. What should I believe?
I didn't know.
The profile, is there any profile, and the motivation factor? Why 500,000 coming from Europe? If you look at, again, the country I know best, which has the highest number of jihadists in Syria per capita, of course, for the size of the country, the average is between 20 and 30 years old. We have 20% women. This is a growing trend. 6% of converts, and I know in other countries the number of converts is rising as well. And the distribution is a very strange one. In Belgium, it's mainly the northern part of the country and the center. Nearly nothing from the south. And 80% from the Moroccan community, and not the Turkish one, and they are probably equal. Why is it so? We could discuss that later on as well. Motivation, I tend to select the 4 following one, but there are probably many more. The first, and it was probably valid at the outset of the conflict, the feeling in the Muslim community that the West was not doing enough to help the Syrian Spring. And when you watch that on TV and you see that more than 250,000 Syrians have been killed by Assad, and that the West is not active enough, you may feel that it's your duty as a Muslim to go there and fight, to help. The second is probably more linked to the classical narrative of the jihad of Al-Qaeda, which is not new, which resonates even more there because it seems so, I'm not an expert, but Syria, Al-Sham, is a magic place where the Mahdi is supposed to come back on earth, where the final battle against the infidel will take place, and therefore it is pretty attractive. And the caliphate is now set up. And if you want to be part of this, it's better to be at the very early stage. The third reason may have to do something to do with the growing tension between the Sunni and the Shia. If you are a Sunni and you see the development, you may have the feeling that the Shia are winning, that Iran is more and more important, more and more influent regionally, and therefore what's happening in the Sunni world, it's changing with the new king in Saudi Arabia, and they try to solve the problem, their division on the Muslim Brothers, which was one problem for the Sunni side. But since recently, there was no champion anymore on the Sunni side. Syria collapsed. Iraq has been taken over by the Shia. Libya, it's the chaos. Egypt, which was the champion, it was the cultural reference for the Sunni world, was inward looking, and Saudi Arabia was not taking the lead. So you could have the feeling that there was a problem there, and as a Sunni you may want to join to fight against the Hezbollah, against the... And the last, a very disappointing reason, and that has been very well explained by a French journalist who followed 20 guys going to Syria, 20 French, he said it's a problem of testosterone. It's a generation which has exhausted the pleasure of game on internet and who is seeking the thrill of the real war, and they believe that it's exciting to go and fight and have a Kalashnikov. It's very sad. It's probably a generation which has no really purpose in life and a bit lost, and that is a sad explanation. There may be other explanations. So it is difficult, and I said the more I read, the less I understand. We are on the safe side when we say that it's probably a combination of factors: personal grievances, ideology, and facilitation factor. Personal grievances, of course, real or perceived. Could be just perceived, could not be just real. Problem of identity, sense, purpose in life, problem of integration, as you said, Mrs. Chair, feeling of alienation, discrimination. That could be or moral outrage when you see what is happening in the world. The ideology, the question is how to weigh the two aspects. I have a very good friend who is an expert on radicalization. He believes that ideology does not play a role.
No. Really?
I'm not convinced, and especially Islam. I have a different views, and I will come to that in terms of policy response. I think, of course, it's not Islam. We don't want to amalgamate Islam and terrorism. We should avoid that at any price. But there is still one interpretation, very conservative one, which is not conducive to tolerance, and which probably plays a role at the end of the process of radicalization, but plays a role. And finally, facilitation factors, as I've said, well, Syria and Iraq, it's easy to reach, cheap, easy to reach through Turkey. That was not the case with Afghanistan, northern Mali, or Somalia. Networks, as I've said, if you have an active Salafi network on the street trying to spot the vulnerable people and giving them money and tips on how to cross the border, that helps, and internet, and I'll come to that. So that's my first point, very complex phenomenon. The second one, for us, the EU, bureaucrats, difficult because the most relevant policies still remain with the member states. Education, access to job, even the organization of the religion. And it's even more, not much the state, but the local level. Third aspect, highly sensitive. It took 13 years, you hear what I'm saying? 13 years to the European Commission to dare saying something on radicalization. I've had personal tough discussion with the Vice President of the Commission who was reluctant to speak about this because they were, and I understand the point, afraid to stigmatize a community or a religion and say, we have an excellent brand. European Commission has, not everywhere, but it's quite neutral, very good brand. We don't want to enter into this very, very difficult territory. And the second aspect is, should we enter into the discussion about the religion? And I'm sure we will have it. States are not supposed to enter into theological debate. We have state even more secular than others. The French Republic is completely secular, while my country, the state pays the salary of the priest, the pastor, the rabbin, and the imam. And therefore have a discussion, quite tough discussion on training of imam, on education, on many aspects. The fourth aspect, and then I turn to the substance of what we are doing, is the very important to distinguish between what I call prevent specific policies and prevent relevant policies. What do I mean by that? By prevent specific, it's what we are currently doing among Ministers of Interior and Justice, working on internet, on prison, on radical imams, on working with victims of terrorism to de-glamorize terrorism, because for many of these kids, it's glamour. So that's quite specific, and it requires to mobilize the intelligence, the police, and so on. But it's equally important to develop, prevent relevant policies, but it's important that it's not be seen as mainly driven, or even driven at all, by counter-terrorism objective. Education, or even interfaith dialogue. You will not start an interfaith dialogue just to prevent people from getting radicalized. You do it for its own sake, because it has its own merit, but in a way it helps. I remember I was keen to join a group in Brussels dealing with integration. They all said, please don't come. We don't want to see you, because we don't want to suggest there is a link between lack of integration and terrorism. But it is important that it does happen. So part of the difficulty I have is to make sure that some policy do happen, but I'm not seen behind or even involved or linked. So that's important. So what are we doing? I think we've made significant progress in 10 years in Brussels, from a first vision in 2005, which was not based on very sophisticated studies or thinking, where we had distinguished between the motivation factors, the facilitation factors, the structural factors. And we have evolved a lot. The Commission has taken a quite interesting lead in this subject. And now we have a revised strategy and a revised action plan with a lot of ideas and proposals. And beside that, an excellent idea of the Commission was to set up, and I think someone raised that this morning, a network of practitioners connecting nearly 1,000 field practitioners, the Radicalization Aware Network, just to share the best practices, because this is not an exact science. Everybody makes mistakes, and we are keen to learn from each other's mistakes. And it is a quite interesting cross-fertilization exercise. If I take France, for instance, until recently, and it's not a criticism, the French were not very convinced by the need to have prevent policies. They thought it was purely Anglo-Saxon. They said, it's an obsession of the Anglo-Saxon. We have our own tools, and we are successful. Then they saw the booming number of French going to Syria, the highest number in absolute terms. And they said, we have to do something about that. And the current Prime Minister, Valls, appointed the Préfet and asked him to go all over Europe and even further away to collect the best practice. And he relied and he used a lot the Radicalization Aware Network. He prepared a report, which is the base of a quite impressive policy now in France. And I must say, these days, the French are probably at the top of the subject. They are extremely interested, extremely active, and we can learn a lot as well from their experience. So let me just illustrate some of our policy, but quickly. On the prevent-specific policies, we have tried to promote as much as possible action at local level by helping to train frontliners, social workers, community police officers, prison staff, teachers, to detect as early as possible signs of radicalization, because we need to mobilize non-security response as early as possible. But that requires that you are very well trained, because it's not as stupid as the bird and the loose pan. This is completely stupid. No, it's a process which is not that easy to detect. And in prison, for instance, there is an Iranian expert in France who has studied the behavior in prison 10 years ago and today. He said there is a huge difference. 10 years ago, the most extremists showed active signs of radicalization. No, the taqiyya means that they try to hide it. And you should be very good to get to detect the signs. Hotlines. The French set up a hotline to help families just to report when they just lost. It's amazing the number they got. It's amazing. And it helps a lot. And it's not to just get a security response. That requires that you build trust with families, with communities. It is a long-term process. You don't buy trust overnight. Second, internet. We all agree that's an important element. No time to develop how much Daesh is media savvy. And so ministers have now decided to work actively and develop a public-private partnership with the big internet companies, and we'll launch, the Commissioner Avramopoulos will launch by the end of this year a forum to discuss with them the four following issues, and they are very difficult to handle. The first one is to improve detection of unlawful content. We so far had a platform at Europol called Check the Web, where Europol was supposed to detect a bit, but they were not allowed to do a lot. They had not enough staff, partly because the intelligence community in all of the member states are keen to do that themselves separately. But I think it makes sense to have a common resource, because we don't, all of us, have the people speaking all the necessary languages and the skill to detect exactly what is unlawful, distasteful, and problematic. The second one is how can we remove from internet much more quickly unlawful content? And here, ministers have decided to set up at Europol, I think someone mentioned that this morning, an internet referral unit based on the experience in Britain, where inside Scotland Yard they have an internet referral unit which works extremely well. And Google told us, and that was what convinced us so much, that when the Internet Unit of Scotland Yard refer a content to them, Google removed them in 93% of the time. When you and I, we flag a content we don't like, Google remove it only in 33% of the time. Why is it like this? Because we may have different views on what is distasteful and what is illegal, what is not consistent with the terms and conditions of the companies. These people are trained. Now we have 20 guys, I think, at Europol doing the job, and they will improve the way they do. I think it's a major improvement. The third aspect is create content, develop counter-narrative. It's something we've started doing. We need to do much more than what we have done so far. And to that end, I pushed, and the Commission accepted to support financially a team of experts, again from Britain, of people coming from the advertisement world, and they know how to convince a lady with black hair to buy a shampoo from L'Oréal and not from Garnier, when the shampoo is exactly the same. So these are people who know how to communicate. And one of the reasons I mentioned before why some people may have been attracted by the conflict in Syria, the feeling that we were not doing enough, it is in fact not true. We are doing, probably not enough, but we are doing a lot. We already have spent 4 billion euro in humanitarian assistance. Then I turned to the colleagues from ECHO, the humanitarian arm of the European Union, and I said, why don't you advertise more what you do? And you do well, extremely well. We're a force of good. They say, but we have a pile of publication, but nobody reads them. They are very well done. It's a very nice booklet. But it's not communication. Communication is to segment your audience, to know what message and craft your message according to the audience you want to reach, and it's for professional. I'm not a professional. So we have now a team of experts. By the way, they will visit Prague next week, Monday, Tuesday, and they are there to advise the government to develop a strategic communication policy. And it's not only government, of course, it's civil society, because the credible voices are more in civil society than within government. But that requires first that you work with real experts, that you provide the necessary resource, and you need to build the capacity of civil society to develop this counter-narrative. The big internet companies have started doing that. For instance, Twitter, they train some young guy like they would train the team for the electoral campaign of Obama for the presidential election. Using Twitter, you need a training. I was myself visiting the big internet companies end of July this year to discuss this topic with them. And when I was on the campus of Facebook, and I do my best to catch up, I had really the feeling that I was a 20th century male, pre-internet, confronted to geeks, most of them from Asia, completely able to use all these social networks 10 times better than I do. So it requires some training. And finally, another subject, but it's not relevant for radicalization, is the question of encryption, but will be discussed with the companies. I think this partnership is very much needed. One word on the prevent relevant policies. After the Charlie Hebdo attack in Paris, heads of state and government met on the 12th of February, and they adopted a quite ambitious statement, 3 baskets, one on more the security response, one on prevent, and on prevent, they insist a lot on the relevant side. Fight against discrimination, tolerance, fundamental rights, integration. And they've asked the Commission, the different institutions in Brussels, to do much more on that. And we will have on the 1st and the 2nd of October, under the leadership of Vice President Timmermans, a big conference on Islamophobia. And I know that the term Islamophobia is questioned by some intellectuals, especially in France, and anti-Semitism. And the two are very problematic. There is a rise of anti-Semitism in Europe, which is very worrying, and a rise of Muslim bashing or Islam bashing, if you don't want to use the term Islamophobia, which is equally worrying, Pegida and that sort. And we have to do and think out of the box how to address these two challenges. If you take the anti-Semitism, 7,000 French Jews left for Israel in 2014, and it's supposed to be 10,000 this year. They call that Aliyah, and this is not acceptable. So we will have to mainstream prevent concern in different policy, youth, education, culture, sport. I don't have time to develop, but I have some ideas. We have to be much more effective in the implementation of our legislation against racism and xenophobia. There are not enough convictions of people who are uttering a message of hatred, and especially on the internet. And two other ideas that I will develop under my 4 challenges: the need to promote European Islam, and the last one is think big. Europe should, I think, launch a sort of virtual Erasmus to promote mutual understanding. So let me quickly, telegraphic term, turn to the 4th challenge, very telegraphic term. The first, and I use the way the former President Sarkozy put the subject, to promote a European Islam and not Islam in Europe. So I don't open the question as to whether Islam has something to do with radicalization, but, and I know it's a very sensitive subject, there is a fight inside Islam. That is obvious. The second, as I said, it's very sensitive for government to embark into a theological debate. But I think we would benefit a lot to learn from each other on each other's experience and experiment. And there are different initiatives. The Austrian, for instance, adopted recently a legislation banning external financing of religion in Austria. The German have the Islam Conference. The French have taken several initiatives with the Muslim communities in France. Belgium has set up a committee on the training of imam. What can we do to make sure that our Muslim friends in Europe, 20 million, feel they are part of the social fabric of Europe and they can exercise their religion like any other denomination? First problem. The second, radicalization outside Europe. I have not enough time to develop this, but I'm really active. It took some time to convince the colleague that it was important to invest in this. We have to help a lot of the country, and especially around the Mediterranean, to address the problem of radicalization. I won't develop this, but it's very important. Third, it's my, for me, top priority is to develop robust rehabilitation program for returnees from Syria and Iraq. And let's be honest, we are not there yet. Why? First, because since we are not present in Syria, it's very difficult to collect the evidence that someone was fighting alongside Daesh or Jabhat al-Nusra. And therefore, unless they leave electronic traces, we can intercept a conversation, we get a picture with the flag of Daesh behind, it will be difficult to secure conviction in court. So we will have a lot of people returning where we have intelligence, but no evidence, and so we will not be able to prosecute them. So what do we do with them? I'm told that in order to monitor someone 24/7, you need at least 20 members of a security service. It will not be feasible in a country where you have 150 returnees, forget it. So you need to do something about someone who is potentially dangerous. First reason. Second reason, I plead to avoid prison to the maximum possible. Prison, as I've said, are incubators of radicalization. If we can offer an alternative to prison, to someone ready to undertake a rehabilitation process, let's try at least this one. But there is also the work in prison. We have to do a lot more and a lot better in prison to rehabilitate because, as I've said, with weak evidence, we will have people convicted for very few years, and therefore they will be released very soon back in society. So we have to work on this. That requires first that you you assess the dangerousness of the returnees, to have multidisciplinary team, because some will need psychological support, social support, some will need to be brought to court, and some will have to be will be monitored discreetly. This is something we'll discuss, Minister of Justice will discuss mid-October under the leadership of Commissioner Jourova. She's very interested by the subject. I help her to reflect on this. This is an important subject, and I'm afraid, despite some national experience, we're not advanced enough on this. I don't say more than this. And finally, and I stop here with this, President Obama launched last year a program which I found extremely attractive. He called it the Stevens Virtual Exchange Program. The idea is to use internet to connect youth from the West and youth from the Arab world to remove stereotypes. And the idea is teenagers having the same teacher for 1 year and using internet as a platform, history or geography. And it's quite impressive because that contributes a lot to open the mind of people. We have had in Europe Erasmus, and if there is something that the Commission did very well and contributes so much to open the mind of our youth, it is Erasmus. We can use internet to connect millions of Europeans and talk to each other, because most of the time it's the lack of a mutual understanding which is at the origin of all the problems. So voilà, some of the file we have on the file. Thanks a lot.